we're gonna need a bigger shelf. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today we're doing something a little bit different. Ever since I first started this channel, I've had people asking me about my Blu-rays. I typically only do Blu-ray haul videos once or twice a year, but every time I do, I get a lot of requests from people for a collection video. You guys get a glimpse of a very small piece of my movie collection in all of my videos, but these shelves go floor to ceiling and are around the room, including my VHS tapes, DVDs, Blu-rays, and 4K, excluding duplicates. I have about 4,500 movies, so I've always been a little reluctant to do a full collection video, because it would be ridiculously long, even if I just held up each movie and said its name. Again, I know it's something that people are interested in, and I'll continue to try to think of a way to make something like that feasible, but in the interim, I thought I could do something along those lines that's a little more reasonable. So in honor of Shark Week 2024, we're going to take a look at the shark movies in my collection. So I've got a stack of movies here that are about sharks. I've definitely got other films that feature a shark at some point, like Finding Nemo or Thunderball, but I just pulled out the ones that I would consider shark movies. I'm not going to be ranking them here or anything. We're just going to go through these alphabetically, and I'll briefly talk about each of them, kind of like I do in my haul videos. So let's dive into these. Okay, so first up we've got the only number movie of the bunch, 47 Meters Down. So this movie came out in 2017, features Claire Holt and Mandy Moore as two sisters who are kind of on the shark watching expedition. They go down in a shark observation cage to the bottom of the ocean, and then things happen and they get stuck down there, right? The cable attaching them to the boat breaks and they can't get back up, and they're running out of oxygen. So it's kind of this race against time thing, plus sharks, and it's not very good. I would say of the movies that kind of tries to be an actual thriller, tries to be something that isn't very spoofy and parody of my collection, this is probably one of the weaker ones. It's not awful, but was never a film that I loved. And because of that, I've actually never seen the sequel. I know there's another one, I think 47 Meters Down, Uncaged or something like that. But I haven't seen that one. This one kind of, it's got like sort of the fake out ending and all sorts of stuff. So it's okay, but not a favorite of mine. But we're going from one that's not a favorite to my favorite of the shark movies, and probably a lot of people's favorite of the shark movies, and that's Jaws. So, I mean, what can I say about this that hasn't been said by a million people? Fantastic movie, one of my absolute favorite Steven Spielberg films, 1975. And I've got the digibook version of that. They don't really make these anymore, but I've got a couple of these that are universal. I think E.T. is somewhere around here that's like this as well. But it's got the nice kind of information on the inside, right? There's like storyboards and pieces of the script, all the different posters from around the world and stuff. So it's kind of cool as an actual collection item. But I also just really like this movie. I mean, this is a film that I have watched since I was a little kid, but I watch it every year. I try to watch it on the 4th of July, but if I can't get it in on the actual day, I always watch it somewhere in that zone, like 4th of July weekend, obviously, because it's very fitting for this movie. But just a great one. Really enjoyable, kind of tense, kind of scary, obviously not as scary, I don't think, to me as it probably was to people who saw this at the time of release in theaters. Definitely didn't make me scared of going in the water or anything, but definitely a very enjoyable one that I love watching every year. So then we've got Jaws 2. So this one, not great, but not awful in my opinion. I know a lot of people love to hate on the Jaws sequels, but this one's okay. I mean, it's certainly not up to par with the original movie, but it's not bad for kind of an average shark movie. So this one came out a few years later, 1978, definitely trying to capitalize on being a sequel, you know, kind of among those earlier sort of sequels, kind of following along with what Planet of the Apes had done only, you know, a few years later, or a few years earlier, with the whole sequel thing. But this one, it's interesting, right? Because it brings back a lot of the same characters, right? We've got Roy Scheider, Lorraine Gary back as Chief Brody, and Ellen, his wife. And it's set a few years later, right? His kids have grown up a bit. His oldest is a teenager, and is in peril at various points in this, along with other teenagers. Obviously, the iconic water skiing scene here. And the teenage stuff is kind of, they make some really dumb decisions and they're stupid, but like, it's okay. It's not awful. There's some interesting, Keith Gordon, for instance. This was his first movie. He's one of the teenagers, a couple of years before he would go on to star in like Christine and other films. There's kind of some interesting, stuff going on there. And the film itself takes an interesting route, because on one hand, it tries to be kind of this character study of Brody almost, right? It kind of is addressing his PTSD from the experiences in the first movie, and kind of how the town isn't paying attention, won't believe him, and they kind of gaslight him into trying to think that there isn't a shark problem. So like the mayor's dumb again, nobody believes him. But then it has all of the ridiculous teenage stuff and the shark attacks and much more action-y, I guess, kind of B-movie shark stuff rather than the tension of the original movie. But it's got some good stuff. Obviously the finale is memorable in the way they deal with the shark. So not bad. Not great. Especially not great when you watch them in sequence, but not an awful movie either. So next up we've got Jaws 3, or Jaws 3D, since it was originally released in 3D, and you can certainly tell that when you're watching it. There are a bunch of those scenes where like clearly the thing is supposed to be coming out of the screen at you and it looks kind of silly if you're not watching it in 3D. This one I know is very hated in general, but I would say that I like this movie more than the average person. I don't know if I could go as far as to say I genuinely like it. It's a bad movie. It's not a good film. It's worse, certainly, than the original. It's worse from a movie quality than even Jaws 2. But there's something about this one that kind of, I don't know, I kind of like it in an interesting way, it tries to do something different. It's the only movie where, like, none of the original people are in it, which is kind of unique, but it still is carrying on with some of the characters, focusing on Brody's two sons. And it's set someplace else, right? It's not set on Amity Island. It's in Florida at SeaWorld, which is just crazy to me. Like, the fact that SeaWorld was like, oh yeah, sure, use our namesake for this place where this, like, ridiculous, horrible shark attack happens. Like, I don't know. They would certainly never, I don't think, give the go-ahead to use their name these days. But it's stupid, It's got this kind of weird plot, but it features Dennis Quaid as Michael, the older son, and now he's, in his 20s, late 20s somewhere, and he's like an engineer who's designing a new exhibit at SeaWorld, and his girlfriend's a marine biologist, and they're trying to, like, sort of rehabilitate a shark, but not, and then, like, there's a whole lot of weird stuff that goes on in this, obviously culminating in some ridiculous moments, including the very iconic 3D moment, including the shark. So not good. Really dumb character decisions, really just weird decisions in general. Obviously ends with, like, a freeze frame and them cheering about dolphins, and, like, it's so cheesy. Not good, but one that I enjoy, and probably, I guess you could consider it a guilty pleasure, but I mean, like, you shouldn't feel guilty about liking movies, so I don't like to use that phrase really, but I guess if you had to consider it something, that would be, of the Jaws films, this would be my guilty pleasure. And then rounding out the Jaws movies here, we've obviously got the fourth film, Jaws: The Revenge. So this one came out many years later, right? The previous one was 1983. This one's 1987. And this one I can't really defend. I can't say it's enjoyable or a guilty pleasure. It's really dumb, really kind of hackneyed, really stretching to try to extend this franchise in the most ridiculous ways possible. Basically completely ignores everything that happened in Jaws 3, recasts everybody, all those characters, right? The son, Michael, is now like a PhD candidate in marine biology, so he was not an engineer in this new whatever timeline. I don't know. It's weird, but basically this one's kind of set in the Bahamas, or not the Bahamas, Jamaica. I don't even know. Bahamas. Okay, it was the Bahamas. And so it gets ridiculous. The only like saving grace here is that Lorraine Gary came back and reprised her role as Ellen Brody. But it's a movie that makes no sense. She's almost got this like telekinetic, or telepathic, not telekinetic, telepathic connection with the shark. And I don't know, this shark like is targeting this family. Somehow it's like the shark from the first movie, but obviously that doesn't make sense. None of this movie makes sense. You know, what's his name? Mario Van Peebles has like the most ridiculous accent. It's an absurd movie with some absurd sequences. But I gotta say, I recently rewatched this Blu-ray version of it for the first time, and there was an alternate ending on here, which was actually much better than the theatrical ending. So if you've seen the theatrical ending, you know how kind of ridiculous it gets. It's a very explosive situation, we'll say. And then there's other moments that you're like, oh, come on, are you kidding? Like, especially with a certain character, you're like, are you kidding me? Like, how? You know, this alternate ending kind of gets rid of all that ridiculousness. It's still absurd, right? But it's not as absurd. But it's not a great one. It's got Michael Caine in a really weird role, but not my favorite. Definitely my least favorite of the Jaws. Next up, we've got another shark series. First up, The Meg. So this movie is absurd. Basically, this movie is kind of like they took those Sci-Fi Channel ridiculous shark movies, but just applied a really big budget and put Jason Statham in the lead. That's basically what this movie is. It's dumb. It's got the pseudoscience stuff. It's got a megalodon. It's absurd, makes all these references to other movies, especially Jaws. There's a dog named Pippin in it, like all sorts of stuff. It's really, really dumb. I know a lot of people hate it, but I kind of have a soft spot for it. I don't love it. It's not a good movie from an actual like filmmaking standpoint or a storytelling standpoint, but it's an entertaining movie. It does what it sets out to do, right? It succeeds in its intent, which for a movie like this is kind of all that you can ask for. It's entertaining, and I don't mind rewatching it. You know, this happens to be on TV a lot, and I find myself just like, you know, flipping through the channels and it's on halfway through, and I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll watch the other half of this movie again. So really dumb, but entertaining, and got the Steelbook for this one. Then we've got Meg 2, The Trench. So this is obviously the sequel to The Meg. This one just came out last year, and I've got a review. I've got a review for this one, and I've got a review up for The Meg as well. This one tries to kind of go along the same lines, right? Tries to be sort of spoofy, a big budget, ridiculous B-shark movie. It's okay. It's got some moments. It's got some great stuff in it. Some ridiculous action, some ridiculous sequences. It gets like very prehistoric and has all these other creatures and all sorts of nautical nonsense going on. But it spends too much time on the human characters, right? It just wastes. There's too many storylines, too many plot lines, plot threads related to the humans, to the point where they really don't focus enough on the Meg or these other creatures, the other animals, the action. And so it ends up being much more boring. Has some decent elements, but definitely a step down from the first Meg. Speaking of step downs, really this one came first, but we've got Open Water. And technically Open Water 2 Adrift, because it's a double pack, but really Open Water 2 is not a shark movie. I'll still talk about it, but Open Water. I hate this movie. If you watch my channel, right, you know that I don't say that about films, really, ever, right? Like, I always look for the positive, and I'm always like, well, I don't really like it, it's not good, but I hate open water. Like, I hate it. I saw this movie in theaters. I remember going to see it with my dad, in 2003, and, like, it was just, like, torturous. We both were like, oh my god, this is awful. And it became this running joke for years after that, right? That it was this terrible movie. And then, so he bought me this as a joke much later when I started getting Blu-rays instead of DVDs. He bought me this double pack, to be like, oh, open water. So that's why I own it, if you're wondering why I own a movie I hate. It's not good. I know I dislike it. I hate this way more than the average person does. I think most people are just like, it's an okay movie, maybe. I don't know. It's awful to me. It's so poorly made. It makes no sense. The fact that they're like, it's a true story, and tell this whole thing about something that there's no way they could ever know any of it. It's just, don't like this movie. Open Water 2, I had never seen until I got this Blu-ray. Came out a couple of years after the original. Original was 2003, this one was 2006, I want to say. And is completely unrelated. I was actually looking this up earlier before recording the review here, or the video here. And apparently this was like a completely different movie, completely different script that was written before this one, or at least before this one came out. And it was finally getting made, and then this one was kind of a success, like a very low budget, made a lot of money for its budget. And so they just like tacked on Open Water 2 to this other movie. So it's completely unrelated. And again, not really a shark movie, so I don't know if it really counts here. They mention sharks, and there's this thread of sharks, but it's not like these other movies. But it's so stupid. It's got the most ridiculous premise, but it's one that, like, it works in its stupidity. Basically, you got this group of, like, 20-somethings who go out on this yacht, and they're out in the open water, and they're just fooling around, and they're swimming and all this stuff, and they all end up in the water and realize that they didn't put the ladder down on their yacht, and they can't climb back up because it's too tall and it's too slippery. And so they're like in the water trying to figure out, and there's a baby on board, and it's like this whole ridiculous thing. It's really dumb. Characters make some really, really stupid decisions. The dialogue's awful. But comparatively, like, Open Water 2 is the Jaws, is Jaws compared to Open Water, right? So, again, that's just my, obviously a little biased opinion here, but the Open Water set. Switching gears to something a little bit better, we've got The Shallows with a nice lenticular slipcover that I always liked. I don't know how well it's going to show up on the camera, but it's got kind of the blood in the water and then no blood. So this one came out in 2016. And stars Blake Lively, and it's pretty much her show, right? There are a few other characters in the beginning and the end, but it's mostly her, and she's a surfer who's, going through, like, this mental distress because of her mom, and she's thinking about quitting med school and all this stuff, so she goes off and surfs in this secluded beach in Mexico and gets attacked by a shark. She realizes she's in the shark's feeding ground, and it becomes this really tense, like, how could she survive? It's the survival story. She's out there on the water. She's on, like, a whale carcass for a while, and she ends up on a rock and a buoy and, like, all this stuff. And there's a seagull that she befriends that she names Steven Seagull, or Seagull. But it's not great, right? It's not amazing to me. It's definitely of the non-Jaws 1975 films here that try to be an actual shark movie, try to be an actual thriller. This is definitely the best of them. Again, not an excellent movie, not my favorite, but it's pretty good. It's pretty visceral, right? You, like, cringe because you're like, oh, every time, like, when she gets bit or when she's getting stung by jellyfish or on rocks or whatever, like, it hurts, to watch it, but it's a decent, tense movie. Then we've got, switching gears a little bit here, Shark Tale. So I know I didn't include movies like Finding Nemo and stuff because there's sharks in it, but it's not really a shark movie. This one, I mean, it's right in the name, right? And Lenny the shark here is a main character. This is a 2004 DreamWorks movie. Not very good. Another one I saw in theaters. Basically, Will Smith stars as this fish, and Jack Black stars as Lenny the shark. And it's sort of this ridiculous scenario where the shark's a vegetarian, but he doesn't want to admit that to anybody, like his shark family, who like look down on that. And so he kind of becomes friends with, sort of makes this like deal with Oscar, I think his name is, Will Smith's fish character. And it's just kind of this, I don't know, it's okay. It's not even really okay. It's pretty bad. But it makes really weird reference to Car Wash, like the 1970s movie. This Oscar, again, I think his name's Oscar. Yes, Oscar, works at a whale wash. And so there's like a whole sequence with like the car wash song, and it's like got that sort of like dynamic of the characters in Car Wash. It's weird. Definitely not a favorite DreamWorks movie of mine, but of course I'm me, so I own it. So next we've got Sharknado. Again, I recognize this is not a good movie, right? In no universe is this a good movie, but it's stupidly entertaining. Not my favorite of the Sharknadoes, as we will soon talk about, but this is a Sci-Fi Channel original movie. Horrible, VFX, terrible CGI, terrible story, terrible acting. It's absurd, it's ridiculous, it's not a good movie. But this came out in 2013, and like completely by chance, I happened to catch the original like airing of this movie on Sci-Fi. And so it became this thing that I enjoyed, and became this yearly summer tradition for me every year, because they would put out another Sharknado movie. So I kind of have this attachment to the Sharknado films, even though I very rarely watch them. But this one, it's so stupid. It's, there's this shark, or there's this hurricane. I think it's in California. I don't even know where this one's set. But there's like a freak hurricane that brings all these sharks inland, like really in like on land. And then there are tornadoes that pick up the sharks, and it's sharks and tornadoes. I mean, that, like, obviously Sharknado. It's so stupid. The main character is a guy named Finn, and it's like, it's not a good movie at all. But I have it. So you could probably guess where we're going for a while here. Sharknado 2, the second one. So this came out the next year, so this was 2014. And this, easily my favorite Sharknado movie. Again, not good. They're all awful. They're all terrible. Terrible stories, ridiculous, horrible dialogue, horrible acting, absurdly bad CGI, right? Like, but this one is just so much fun. It's so stupid. They're all so stupid, but this one was the first one that really, not that other one tried to take itself seriously by any means, but this one really just like goes all in on its stupidity. So in this one, they're in New York City, and Sharknadoes happen. And so it's like Sharknadoes at all these monuments destroying things. They're at like a baseball game, and there's sharks coming in and eating players, and this is when they start to bring in all sorts of cameos. My favorite cameo in probably any of these movies is in this one, and it's Al Roker, right? And he's doing the weather, but he's like doing the weather like being like, oh, we got another Sharknado coming in, and it's so stupid. But it's entertaining. At one point, our main character Finn, he like is trying to get across a street that's flooded, and there's all these sharks. So he like jumps on the backs of sharks to get across, and another character goes, he jumped the shark, and it's like, oh, it's so bad. Like, that's the kind of thing that's in this movie, but it's stupidly entertaining. So then we've got the following year, right? Sharknado 3, oh hell no. This one is not as good as Sharknado 2, but I would say they're pretty much all maybe an improvement over the first one. I think this is probably my least favorite of the sequels. Not that that means anything, right? Again, ridiculous. But in this one, Sharknadoes are like starting to really be an issue. Like they just keep popping up everywhere. So they're like all up and down the East Coast at this point, right? Because we had New York City in the previous one. This one focuses from like DC down to Florida. And so we've got like Sharknadoes attacking the White House, and then they're like at Cape Canaveral, and Finn is like all of a sudden like an astronaut, and he's like in space battling sharks. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. This one's got like Frankie Muniz in it, if I remember correctly. It's ridiculous. But I mean, there's not much to say about these individually. And to be fair, it's been a little while since I watched any of these. But they live within me, right? Because like I said, every year, every summer for like 6 years, I would watch the new Sharknado movie. So the next one, the fourth one, is Sharknado: The Force Awakens. Obviously, Star Wars: The Force Awakens parody, but really only a name and poster. The story is not trying to mock that at all. In this one, they're back on the West Coast. And so this one, there's like a time jump, right? And so it's like 5 years later, even though it came out the following year. And they're out in Las Vegas, and like Finn or somebody in their group has like developed this weapon that can stop Sharknadoes. So it's kind of like what was that movie? Geostorm, right? It's kind of like a Geostorm sort of device or whatever. But obviously it doesn't work, and there's all these things, and it becomes more than just Sharknadoes. We get everything. We get lightning-nados and lava-nados and cow-nados and like all sorts of just all these things, these tornadoes that are just these very dangerous solitary. It's so dumb, but it's more entertaining, I guess, than the third one, but it's ridiculous. You'll hear me say that a million times when I'm talking about these. Sharknado 5, Global Swarming. So this one came out the following year. I don't even know what year we're up to now. Probably 2017, somewhere in that zone. 2016 maybe. I don't even know. But now in this case, it's worldwide, right? So they realize it's not just the US being devastated by Sharknadoes, it's the entire world. And so they're in Italy, they're in Egypt, they're in everywhere, London, going through and trying to destroy these Sharknadoes. And at this point, Finn has a kid named Gil. And so Gil gets like swept up in one of these Sharknadoes, and they're trying to track him. That's the whole point of this movie. They're going around the world trying to find Gil. But there's like, it gets like, this is when, not that it ever made any sort of scientific sense, right? But this is when it starts to go full-blown sci-fi, because all of these Sharknadoes now have like portals to other Sharknadoes. So this is how they're like globetrotting in this movie. They get swept up. They intentionally go into Sharknadoes so that they can be transported to another country. It's dumb. And it ends with like one of the most ridiculous cliffhangers you could ever see. Dolph Lundgren is in this in like a really weird role that I won't ruin in case, the one person on the planet that wants to see this movie. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's ridiculous, but it's entertaining. It's entertaining. And then we got Sharknado 6 here. So it's called The Last Sharknado, It's About Time. And it was the final Sharknado. So 2018. So that one was 2017. So 2018, this one picks up with that cliffhanger of the first one. And basically, if you couldn't tell from the It's About Time, it's a time travel movie. This is basically like a Sharknado version of Bill and Ted and Back to the Future, all mashed up. They go through all these things. They're like in prehistoric times, there's dinosaurs, then they're in like medieval times, then they're in like 1950s or 60s beaches, like a beach party, and it's like, it's all over the place. It's so ridiculous. They're like with, I don't even want to spoil it. It's just so absurd. But this was the last one. And I remember after this, after watching the premiere on Sci-Fi Channel, because I'm a loser who was doing this for 6 summers of my life, I remember it was kind of sad, because I mean, I'm glad that they had, like, a proper ending to this franchise, but it was kind of weird, because it had become such a summer staple for me, that I was like, man, it's like the end of an era-nado here, but at least Anchor Bay, for whatever reason, I don't even know, this one's not even Anchor Bay, some of them were Anchor Bay, or Asylum, or whoever, put them out on Blu-ray, and they all have, like, extended cuts and pretty significant, special features, which is ridiculous in itself, but we got them. So that's the end of the Sharknado, run, but we do have another Sci-Fi Channel film here, Sharktopus. So this one predates the Sharknadoes. This came out in 2010, and this was my first Sci-Fi Channel absurd, ridiculous shark movie experience. This was one, I did not see the original premiere. I saw this when, like, I don't know, a year or two later, when I was in grad school. And my friends had seen this, and they were talking about it as if, like, it was this very common knowledge thing, and I was like, I've never heard of this movie. So, like, we all, like, got together one night and watched this movie, and it's so absurd, you know, like, not, again, after the Sharknadoes, like, nothing seems absurd, but this is, like, this genetically modified Sharktopus hybrid, but it's so absurd, like, right, it can, like, climb up on things and be grabbing, like, eating people. It's so ridiculous. Again, like the Sharknadoes, the CGI is awful, the acting is awful, the story is awful. You know, there's this one part that we used to make fun of for years after this grad school night thing. There's a scene where this guy gets, like, I don't know if his friend gets killed. I can't even remember. His friend gets killed or his arm gets bitten off or something. It's in the very beginning. He's, like, on the side of the boat, and he goes, "Oh no, not like this." And it's just, like, this horrible line delivery, and it's so emblematic of the entire movie and of all of these Sci-Fi Channel movies, which is why, like, a movie like The Meg really honed in and parodied, kind of pulled from, at least, parodying this kind of stuff. But it's Sharktopus. It's something. All these ones they're something. Alright, so that was my Shark Blu-ray collection as of Shark Week 2024. Definitely a bit of quality variation across these films, I would say, but some of them are great, and some of them are entertainingly terrible. But what do you think of these movies? Which shark films are in your collection? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, let me know what you think of the idea of a topical collection video like this. Is this a type of video you like to see more of, or are you good with just a one-off shark version? And don't forget, if you're interested in sinking your teeth into any of these shark movies yourself, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these shark movies. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this Blu-ray collection video, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it so you can see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.